Hey guys, it's Alex. Since I've been on Booktube for almost 2 years now, I was kind of thinking about all the books that Booktube has recommended that I read, and there have been quite a few. And I kind of thought that it'd be interesting to do a top 5 best and worst recommendations from Booktube. I wanted to start with the top 5 best book recs, so that's what today's video is. Most of these weren't recommended by a specific person, they were just generally hyped around Booktube, and I eventually picked them up. But for the two that I picked up because of a specific person's review, I will specifically mention that person and hopefully link to their review if I can still find it, because it's been a while. The first book on this list is You by Caroline Kepnes. I give this 4 stars and I just loved it. It was such a creepy thriller. It's probably not the best book I've ever read, but it was just so creepy and fascinating to read. It was a wonderfully done perspective. This book has been all over Booktube, but I remember in 2017, I think it had just come out, or had been out for like a year or a few months or something. I don't exactly remember its publication date, but Becca from Books and Looks read it, and she absolutely adored it. She thought it was so creepy and so well done, and she had this book review slash book reading vlog that she had on it. I don't think she's posting videos anymore, but I absolutely loved her channel. She posted with her husband Mike, and they were amazing. And she really talked me into You. Everything she said about it, about how creepy it was and how terrifying it was absolutely true. That book made me so paranoid, and I was so glad that I actually read it. The second book on this list is the only other one that was recommended by a specific person, and that was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I read this back in October, I think. This I gave 5 stars. This was absolutely stunning. It's such a wonderful little book because it's very small, it's very short, it's only like 220 pages or something like that, if even that. But this was recommended by Mionicorn over at the Bookish Land. She recommends me a lot of books that I haven't heard of, that are a lot of like Asian literature. I never pick up any of her book recommendations just because I don't own any, I don't come across them in thrift stores, so they rarely make it to the top of my list. But she recommended me this, and I was like, okay, I need to pick up this book. Like, I need to finally pick up something that she's recommended me. And oh my god, this was amazing. This was so worth it. I need to go through all the other books she's ever recommended and just read them all, because this was stunning. It's Japanese lit fic about a 36-year-old woman who's been working part-time in a convenience store for 18 years. It deals a lot with society's expectations of adults, but also specifically of adult women. There's a lot of discussion on feminism, there's a lot of discussion on gender roles, just societal expectations in general, and it was so fascinating and so well done. And I absolutely adored every second of reading this book. And I never would have picked up this book if it hadn't been for that recommendation. And I'm so glad I did, because I just loved this. I love this to pieces. I read a library copy of this book and actually went out and bought my own copy because of how much I loved it and needed it on my shelf. And I definitely plan to reread it in probably the not too distant future, because it only took me about 2 hours. The next book on this list is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I read this summer of 2017. I think it had just come out. It was all over Booktube that year. I think it came in some book subscription box, so everyone was getting copies of it, and so many people were reading it and loving it. And it sounded like something that was up my alley. It was about a girl with anxiety, so I was down for that. And it was also about online community, her having an online webcomic that got a lot of attention and got a lot of fan art, and her interacting with that and dealing with that in terms of her anxiety. And I gave this book 4 stars. It was so good. It made me cry. It was just an utterly heartbreaking book and such a wonderful depiction of anxiety, because anxiety is one of those things that it's rarely focused on in books. A lot of characters have anxiety, but that rarely takes a focal point of the story, and it really did in this book, and I adored that. Her whole situation was amazing, and the ending just made me cry. It was so worth all the hype that it got, and I was so glad Booktube convinced me to pick up that one. The next book on this list, and the only other book that I own from this list because I need to buy the others, is All the Rage by Courtney Summers. Sadie is not on this list because I read this book in the summer of 2017. I'd never heard of Courtney Summers before, although I think I'd seen her books on library shelves and just never happened to pick them up. But a lot of people were saying they loved this book. I don't remember anyone specifically, but it was very hyped at the time. and it was about rape culture, and I was like, I'm down, I'll pick this up. And it was absolutely amazing. I gave this book 5 stars. It's about a girl who's raped, and she's kind of dealing with the aftermath of that, both in terms of the way she's treated within the community and just her own psychological damage, and it was beautiful. Sadie could also potentially be a follow-up to this point, but I read Sadie because I read this book and because I love this book, and I probably would have read Sadie without all the hype because I already loved Courtney Summers. But this book was the first I'd read of her, the first I'd really heard of her, and it was so amazing. She's one of my new favorite authors, and I'm so unbelievably glad that I found her through Booktube. Like, if Booktube has done nothing else for me, I found Courtney Summers so I can die happy. And the final book on this list is Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. This was very hyped last summer because I believe it came out in June of 2018. I read it in about October of that year, and it was just such a fascinating book, and one that I wouldn't have picked up if it weren't for Booktube. I would have never heard of it if it wasn't for Booktube, because I don't really read a lot of sci-fi, Groundhog Day type stories. It sounds a little bit out of my comfort zone, and it really was, but so worthwhile in that, and so fascinating, and so suspenseful. I buddy read it with Abby MacReads. We both had a wonderful time reading that book. It was just one of those books that's surprising with how fascinating it is, and just, I adored it, and I'm so glad Booktube recommended me that one, and all of the books on this list, because I feel like I wouldn't be the same reader I am if I hadn't read all 5 of these, because these are some of my favorite books now, and I never would have picked them up if I hadn't created my channel and I hadn't just watched a bunch of other people talking about books. So I will be forever grateful to Booktube for all of these. Let me know down below what some of your favorite books you were recommended by Booktube, because I think it's funny how a lot of us would have never read these super hyped books if we weren't on here, if we weren't watching and creating our own content too. And don't forget that next week's video is going to be the worst recommendations I received from Booktube. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.